Okay, let's get started. So welcome to International Lawyers. We are very honored to speak with such highly eminent Chinese and international law scholars like you. We usually begin our interview with just some personal story of our guest. Would you be able to tell us your childhood? Who were your parents and where were you born?
I was born in a small town of 25,000 people, which was a suburb of a city, Elizabeth, New Jersey, which had 100,000 people, which was a suburb of Newark, a big city, which was a suburb of New York. So I lived about an hour from New York, but it was a different world. A very nice pre-World War II small town, lower middle class, but my parents had a nice house on the main street. My father was a rising lawyer, not very prosperous, but he was a city attorney. He was a Republican aspiring politician, and he became our city attorney. But because he was a Republican, after Franklin Delano Roosevelt swept the 1932 elections, my father lost his job as city attorney, and he became just a practicing lawyer after that. He was a very able, outspoken, dynamic person. He never made that much money. He always wanted to be a judge, but because he was a Republican and a Democratic era, he never achieved that goal. He spent a great deal of time campaigning before World War II against the Nazi forces in the United States. We had very strong German-American Bund. About a half hour away was their headquarters for America. They would march around like stormtroopers in uniform. Since we are Jewish, we were very concerned with the anti-Semitic actions. And my father was head of the Jewish war veterans from World War I in New Jersey. And he would go all over New Jersey giving speeches against the rising pro-Nazi movement in America. And I used to go with him as a small kid. So it influenced me. I learned a bit about public speaking, and I learned a bit about anti-Semitism, and I learned about international law and Nazi Germany.
Wow, I never imagined there was an American Nazi campaign at the time.
There was a very strong anti-Allied movement in the United States, led by the famous aviator, Charles Lindbergh.
Oh, really? He just was, oh, really? Oh.
Yes, they were the right wing. And as we struggle against similar forces in the United States today, it makes me think back to that era. So there was an attempt.
He did the story because Charles Lindbergh was famous for the aviation with all around the world. Something like that. Really? He was a hero for some young generations, for Korean young generation when I was a child. So wow, but he had a different story. So
that is correct.
So you went to Yale University and studied law there. So
no, I went to public high schools in this small town. no one had ever gone to Yale before.
You were the first.
Yes. And I went, I had a scholarship. I had to work my way through Yale College. I was interested in international relations. I worked with some very good scholars in international political history. And that made me decide I wanted to do something in international law and international world. I was given a 4-year fellowship to get a PhD at Harvard by the government department there. But I first took a Fulbright fellowship to France. But after spending a year in France, I decided I should study law rather than get a PhD. And although that was much more difficult in terms of expense, I had to work my way through law school. At Harvard, I could have lived like the high bourgeoisie because they gave me a very nice fellowship. I decided to go to Yale Law School, and I had a wonderful time there. I earned my way in part as a counselor to freshmen in the college.
Kind of
and
cute.
I found some very able faculty members who assisted me and inspired me, and sometimes infuriated me in our discussions.
Who
It was an altogether stimulating experience. And I was the editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal.
And you were?
Yes, and that gave me a lot of experience in editing and scholarship, and also in managing an organization. So Yale was a great experience to me. And at the end of my second year, I married my wonderful wife. She worked in the Yale Art Gallery during my third year. And she earned a living that put me through my third year.
She fed you for study.
I always say she was getting her PhD. PhD was put hubby through. Hubby is our slang for it.
Hubby through.
So she worked in the Yale Art Gallery, and we had a wonderful third year.
Right.
And then I went to Washington.
Really? So who were your mentors? At that time, there were many great international lawyers like Miros McDougall and Harold Roswell. Yeah.
Of course, McDougall was my main mentor. He was a wonderful person.
Great, gorgeous man.
He had one flaw, however. He had a wonderful series for how to analyze international law disputes. Every time he applied it to an international law dispute, which the United States was involved. The United States always came out first. In other words, McDougall was quite nationalistic.
Oh, really?
And I had the only fight I've ever had in the classroom with McDougall, because he was defending the U.S. government. He defended the U.S. government World War II. Repression of Japanese people in the United States. We interned them, we detained them, even those who were American citizens. And he upheld the infamous US Supreme Court decision called Korematsu against the United States. And I argued ferociously against that class. Nevertheless, he forgave me and was always a very good supporter. And I got him to write an article for the Yale Law Journal about atomic weapons testing when I was the editor-in-chief of the law journal. McDougall was a very fine person. He didn't know much about Asia. He loved Chinese food, and he had very little acquaintance. He had a wonderful trip to Asia, but it was very superficial. I was more inspired by some of the professors of constitutional law at Yale. Not only were good scholars, but were activists in actively opposing Joe McCarthy and the right-wing repressive trend in American post-World War II society.
The era. Yeah. Wow. I think there are many stories about your Yale life. You're a pioneer of Chinese law studies in the United States. At the time, China was an enemy state. What inspired you to seriously consider China as a focus of your lifelong legal studies?
Most people, when they heard I was deciding to study China, thought I must be having a nervous breakdown. Why would you throw away a promising career in American law to study China at that time?
At the time, unbelievable.
You see, I had an unusual background in Washington. I was the only person ever to have spent a year each for two prominent Supreme Court justices. I worked for Chief Justice Warren, and the following year, I worked for Justice Felix Frankfurter. And both of them made a deep impression on me. I then worked for Dean Acheson in private practice, and I became, after that, an assistant U.S. attorney in the Department of Justice. Before leaving Washington, my last job was to work with Senator Fulbright as an assistant at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And all of these influences made me want to do something in the public law and international field. The problem was what to do. I'm only one person. I'm not triplets, and I had to make some decision. At the time that I had to make a decision, I was the beneficiary of good luck. I didn't know where to start. Should I write about constitutional law? Should I write about international law? I had very little experience. And then the dean of our law school was a friend of Dean Rusk. Dean Rusk had been Assistant Secretary of State under Truman. And then he became president of the Rockefeller Foundation. My dean was very impressed with the South African human rights dilemma.
At the time.
And he went to see Dean Rusk and said, give us a professorship in African law. We want to specialize on Africa. And Dean Rusk said, Africa is important, but tell me, who is working on China? Is there anybody working on China and law in the United States? And when he discovered that there was not, he told Bob Scalapino, who was our great Asia expert at Berkeley, he said, if the law school wants to train somebody on China, we will support him for 4 years in order to acquire expertise. My dean called me in and said, I know you're not interested, but find me somebody. Find me East German who studied in China. Find me a political scientist who knows Chinese, who's willing to come to law school. Find me a Chinese who's a law school graduate our faculty can accept. This is a good opportunity. Well, I tried for a month everything.
Everything.
Other people.
You found someone?
And nobody was.
Nobody.
You see, we had bad relations with China, resulting from the Korean War, of course. We couldn't go to China. Chinese couldn't come to America. We couldn't get much material from China. Nobody wanted to waste his life studying China. And then I thought, it sounds very interesting. I wanted to be a pioneer. I didn't want to give up making a lot of money in law practice in order just to teach torts. I wanted to do something distinctive. And then I saw Confucius said, establish yourself at 30.
30. 30.
Sansure early, stand firm at 30. And I was just 30. And something clicked. And I said, go for it.
Go for it. Okay.
Yeah. And my wife was very good. She had always been interested in Chinese art. She said, if you study Chinese law, I'll study Chinese art. She said, but you're picking one area where you'll never make any money as a consultant. Because most law professors supported themselves by adding to their academic salary by doing outside consulting. But I was picking one area, she said, where no one will ever want to consult you. So we will have to live on your salary, which was $10,800 a year.
That was at the time, a year.
And we had 3 children. So that's how I decided to go into China. I saw China was the future. China was going to be very important. China had terrible relations with the world. Law would be an important instrument.
All right.
For trying to improve relations with China and integrate China into the world community. So I thought, this is worth doing something for.
Great.
It was risky, but I knew I was good at studying foreign languages. And I'd learned Spanish, I'd learned French. And yeah, I even studied Hebrew when I was a child. So I was confident that I could deal with the Chinese character.
So let's talk more about China. In the early 1970s, you played a crucial role in U.S.-China rapprochement. We hear that you had an opportunity to speak with the then Prime Minister Zhou Enlai. What both of you discussed, and how about your personal impression of Mr. Zhou Enlai?
Zhou Enlai made a very deep impression. We talked for 4 hours.
Really?
Yeah. And it was really a dinner he was giving in honor of my senior Harvard colleague, John Fairbank.
Oh, I know.
They were old friends from before the war.
Before the war.
But when Zhou Enlai heard that I was in China, he also invited me. So we had an hour of cocktails, and then we had 3 hours at dinner. At dinner, I sat on his left side. John Fairbank sat on his right side. And there were several other people there, including the famous American newspaper correspondent, Harrison Salisbury. It was a very good discussion. And he showed humor, understanding. He had done his homework on every guest. He knew our resume. And when he said to me, I understand you have done many books on the Chinese legal
system.
Yeah, he said it with a kind of humor because he knew at that time the Chinese legal system didn't amount to much. And he thought maybe I had made more out of the Chinese legal system than China had. He was a clever man. He was very concerned with Taiwan problem at the time. The two major problems at the time were the Vietnam War and the normalization of relations with China. He knew I had been involved in pushing American policy toward establishing diplomatic relations with China. And he wanted to finish the process. You see, Nixon only took us part way. And then Watergate interfered. And Nixon never completed normalization. And because of the Taiwan question, we all knew that normalization was going to take some time and was going to be difficult. So we spent quite some time talking about Taiwan. Fairbank and I, being Harvard professors, tried hard to get Joe and I to send people to Harvard. We wanted to start international educational exchange. He saw the importance of education, sending people abroad. But Joe did not want to do it until normalization was completed. He wanted to wait until we had abandoned Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek, etc., and established relations with Chairman Mao. So that took a good part of the conversation. And the rest of it was concerned with how does the United States extract itself from Vietnam, and to what extent China could play a role. So it was and Joe and I was a clever man.
He's a clever man.
He would throw up a question and then wait for us to respond, and then he would respond. It was a little bit like shooting ducks, and he was a very clever man.
Wow, it's a historic moment that when you just talk about the Taiwan question and Vietnamese question at the time. In the course of normalization, what were the main considerations of President Nixon and Secretary Kissinger about this problem? Did you have many discussions with them?
See, in the 1966 to 68 period, I was chairman of a Harvard-MIT committee to study China relations. And we were preparing a memorandum to give to whoever got elected president in 1968, whether Democrat or Republican. And we made rather detailed recommendations. And the first was, this was interesting. The first recommendation was the president should, whoever the new president was,
would be
should select somebody in whom he had the greatest confidence, to have secret, if necessary, deniable conversations with the Chinese leadership, to try to establish a new course for our relationship. So that was our first recommendation. And of course, then we said we should move toward establishing diplomatic relations, but we should not abandon Taiwan. We knew we would have to abandon Chiang Kai-shek, that we would have to end diplomatic relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan, but that did not mean we had to say that Taiwan was part of the People's Republic of China. So Professor Edwin Reischauer, a great authority, he was determined, representing the Japanese interests, that Taiwan should not be handed over to mainland communist China. So we made a recommendation, and then we saw our colleague Henry Kissinger was going to become Nixon's national security advisor. So we gave that memorandum to Henry, and he took it very seriously, especially the first recommendation, because he wanted to be sure that he was the one selected by Nixon to have secret conversations with China. And I used to then meet with Henry every few months to review progress on our recommendations. So that was the origin of the secret trip.
Yes, just prefer for stomach ache.
I don't think any historian who's written about this has recognized that. Quite, and this was supposed to be a confidential memorandum. But after the secret trip, in August of 1971, a right-wing Republican congressman released the news. And I think if you look at the, I think it's August 6, 1971 congressional record, our memorandum is printed in the record.
Was printed.
Yeah.
So Taiwan was a pointed issue in East Asia as well as in the United States. What was the main problem of Taiwan for the United States since Trump administration? The tension around Taiwan has been escalating a lot. So
you see,
what is the main problem of Taiwan towards United States?
This was a hugely sensitive problem right from the beginning of Chairman Mao's takeover of China. He was preparing a huge fleet of little ships to take over Taiwan, and the US was protecting Taiwan. We had a big national debate in 1948, 49, early 50. Should the US defend Taiwan and Chiang Kai-shek, or should we allow Chairman Mao to complete the Chinese Revolution by integrating Taiwan with the mainland? In January 1950, President Truman and Secretary of State Acheson in successive weeks announced, amid great debate and controversy, the US would not protect Taiwan. That Taiwan, although there was no peace treaty yet, was part of China, and we did not want to be seen as interfering with the territorial integrity of a great Asian country. No Asian state would be happy if the United States interfered with China's territorial integrity. Many people disagreed with that. Some because Taiwan is an important place strategically. Some disagreed because we shouldn't allow the people on Taiwan to be turned over to a communist dictatorship. That was the position until June 25th, 1950. In Asia, it was the 26th, I think. It was the morning of June 26th when North Korea started the Korean War. That changed everything. Overnight, President Truman said the US would keep its military in Taiwan, and would defend Taiwan, because all of a sudden he said the status of Taiwan is undetermined.
Mm-hmm.
There has been no peace treaty,
mm-hmm.
and we have to leave it to the restoration of security in the Pacific until there's some form of UN trusteeship or there's some peace treaty that settles the status of Taiwan. So we reversed our position 180 degrees.
Just
overnight. It was Chairman
opposite direction. Mm-hmm.
It was Chairman Mao's biggest mistake
mm-hmm.
to support North Korea.
Mm-hmm. You think so?
Of course,
mm-hmm.
because it meant he could not take over Taiwan,
mm-hmm.
and it meant that China would get involved in war with the United States mm-hmm. in the Korean Peninsula.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So ever since then, the status of Taiwan has been a huge controversy.
Controversies.
For 70 years, it's been the main goal of the People's Republic regime mm-hmm. to recover Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, international conditions have changed very dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Chiang Kai-shek died in 1975.
Mm-hmm.
That started a process that by 1995 had brought about democracy to Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
You had, by that time, a large population, and nobody in the majority of the population wanted to return to China. Taiwan became a democracy. Communist China became an ever fiercer dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
And you had both strategic and human rights arguments for not allowing the People's Republic to take over Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
We're confronting that historical problem.
Mm-hmm.
Historical circumstances have changed. In 1968, I didn't really care much
mm-hmm.
whether Mao took Taiwan or not, because Taiwan, I knew from my visits there,
mm-hmm.
was also a military dictatorship.
Regime under Chiang Kai-shek.
Chiang Kai-shek was just as tough as Chairman Mao.
Oh.
And he killed a lot of Taiwan
people. Yeah. So,
but by 1990, I cared a lot about Taiwan.
mm-hmm.
And now, 30 years later, I'm very proud of Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a strong supporter of Taiwan. But that doesn't mean that solves the problem. It only makes the problem more acute.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're confronted with the question, what do we do in Taiwan? How do we improve the situation in the cross-strait arena? And it's our most threatening, imminent problem, most dangerous problem, more dangerous even than the Ukraine problem.
Oh, current Ukraine going, yeah.
And there's a connection between the Ukraine problem and the Taiwan problem. So we're very concerned. This is the most dangerous time US-China relations that I have experienced in my lifetime.
Yeah. There have been serious conflict between US and China, especially since Trump administration. In your opinion, what would be the most efficient way to make peace between the US and China in the future?
Well, when you say peace,
make peace and you make, it's a very delicate problem, but in connection with the Taiwan problem, so I think it's very some complicated, complex problems, but what would be the most efficient way? Because the US is also hoping to make peace in this area.
You see, peace is a very vague term.
Yeah.
And we have to think, what is realistic?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's realistic is at best, a complex, balanced relationship between the US and China. I have called it myself the 4 Cs. I don't mean C-S-E-A, I mean capital C.
Uh-huh.
A balanced policy toward China requires cooperation in certain areas.
In certain areas.
There will be competition. That's the second C, competition. In many areas, economics, business, politics. I think we need criticism. We can't avoid criticism. And we should have honest, balanced criticism, mutual criticism. We benefit from honest criticism when China makes it. Sometimes it isn't very honest. That's the third C.
Third C.
The fourth C is containment.
Containment, still containment.
So we need, now containment is a bad word now. Because people say, oh, that was the Cold War. We should have. But so it would be better if we could say deterrence.
Deterrence.
Deterrence sounds better, you see, but it doesn't begin with C.
C, the 4 Cs.
So I have 4 Cs.
4 Cs.
Cooperation, competition, criticism, and containment. So that sounds easy to say, but it's very hard to do. We need cooperation, but when we criticize, you see, then China says, how can we cooperate with you on the environment or on any other field if you're going to be criticizing us on human rights questions? And we can't give up our concern for human rights.
Human rights.
So we have to work in America on improving our own human rights situation. One benefit of the rivalry with China is it highlights the failure of America to live up to its promise, and how slow we are in doing away with racism and poverty and all the limits on our society.
Yes.
So we have to follow the advice of Chairman Mao. Mao had a famous phrase, we must walk on 2 legs, 2条腿走路. And what he meant was you have to have a policy that balances 2 things. So in the United States, we have to, on the one hand, improve our society. So we hold out a better model to the world. On the other hand, we cannot give up our need to have a balanced policy, including criticism of China's human rights violations. So I'm in that strange position. On the one hand, I want better relations with China. I want to work out a solution and our relations over Taiwan and trade and other matters. On the other hand, I don't want to give up my freedom necessarily to condemn China's many human rights violations. So that's where we are. We're stuck in a kind of dangerous stalemate. Now you get back to Taiwan. I think the US has to show more support for Taiwan, but without violating the understanding with China. I think it's wrong for the US to have uniform military forces in Taiwan today. We have a small number of military people there. I think they should not be there because we agreed in 1972 and again in 79 not to place military in Taiwan. On the other hand, I do think we should do more to give Taiwan more international space in its international relations. So that's why I like what Lithuania has done and what Slovenia has done. They're trying to push Europe into giving Taiwan more international opportunity, even while not opposing China's eventual claim to Taiwan. So we have to keep the Taiwan issue open. We have to avoid war. We have to improve Taiwan's situation. And we have to foster cross-strait relations. So this is a tall order. But there was a time, under my former student, Ma Ying-jeou, when he was president. He was president for 8 years in Taiwan. You did have good cross-strait relations then. But that's because he kept saying Taiwan is part of China. What President Tsai, a very able international law person, has inherited is a situation where she does not want to say Taiwan is part of China, because that would foreclose the opportunity of Taiwan's eventual formal independence. She wants to leave the future open while still preserving the present situation. So this is, it's a fascinating international law question. It's a very crucial question of international public policy.
Yeah, this is very complicated problem. And the four C's you refer to are the main pillars of the US policy toward Taiwan and China for the past few decades. Okay, just let's move to another story, Korea. You may be one of the first Americans who visited North Korea after 1953. Could you tell us the story of your Pyongyang visit?
Yes, it's a great story. I've always been interested in Korean problems. The Asia Society or the Asia Foundation invited me in 1969 to make a first visit to South Korea. Because Korea is so closely related to China, because Korea, China, Japan, and Vietnam are part of the so-called Confucian culture area, it was natural that my study of China would lead me to interest in Korea, North and South. I became involved very much in human rights problems in South Korea. I was a friend of Kim Dae-jung, a friend of Kim Yong-sam, when they were in bad shape in Korea. They were considered enemies of the dictatorship. And Kim Dae-jung gave me and Professor Reischauer credit for saving his life after he was kidnapped in Tokyo.
Right. I heard that.
August 1973. So I had a close interest. I had many adventures in South Korea. But then as we moved toward China, of course, that was my main focus. In 1971-72, I spent the year in Japan. I had a Guggenheim Fellowship to take a sabbatical from Harvard. And when I was in Japan, I met with a Japanese news correspondent from Asahi Shimbun, whom I had helped when he visited Harvard. And when I got to Tokyo, he said, "You helped me, I want to help you. How can I help you?" I said, "You can't help me. You're a newspaper man in Japan. I don't need your help." He said, "But now Asahi Shimbun has made me the special correspondent
Correspondence
for North
to
Korea.
North Korea. Really?
And I have very good relations with the North Korean. It was a de facto embassy in Tokyo, not a formal embassy, but it was just like an embassy. And they had a huge population of North Korean admirers living in Japan. He said, "Do you want to meet them?" I said, "Of course I want to meet them." So on Thanksgiving Day of 1971, he took me over to meet the North Koreans, and we had a long talk. They were very interested because they knew I had been involved in the normalization process with China. And they knew about the Kissinger trip. And they were told by some Japanese correspondents who'd been at Harvard that I might be the next Kissinger in the American political life. So they were interested in me.
You.
So we started to meet, and that started a kind of a romance that went on month after month. They would come to Kyoto. I was spending the year with my family in Kyoto, and they would come and take us out to wine us and dine us, and we kept in touch. It occurred to me that we should go to Korea, North Korea.
North Korea. Yeah.
And but I wanted to go not by myself. I wanted to take my wife and my 3 children. I had 3 young sons then, 11, 13, and 15. And I wanted them to go to China. My wife and I had already been invited as guests of the Chinese government. We'd spent a month in China, but my children were not invited. I wanted my children to see China. And I thought it would also be very instructive for them to see North Korea.
Wow.
In 1971, 72 in America, we were in a kind of revolutionary situation. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, there were all kinds of ideas, and teenage kids were talking about communism and this and that. And I wanted my children to see the real life.
But too dangerous exploration.
So I said to the North Koreans, if you want me to go to North Korea, I'd like to go. I want to go with my family.
Family, together, all together.
And I knew to get to Pyongyang in those days, you only had 2 ways. You had to go via Moscow or via Beijing. So I wanted to go via Beijing because that meant I would have to travel from Hong Kong to Beijing, and that would take about a week. And that would give
by week? By
you,
train or a car?
Yeah, you had to take a train to Guangzhou. Then you could fly to Beijing. But then you had to spend several days to get a visa to go to North Korea. And so if you took your time, you could give your children 1 week in China on the way to Pyongyang. And then you had to come back. So you could take another week.
Another week for Beijing.
Coming back. So that would give my children 2 weeks.
2 weeks to see.
But I wanted them also to have at least 2 weeks in North Korea. So that's what happened. And it worked out very well. And we all had the opportunity we were the 3rd Americans to go there. There had been 2 famous journalists who were on there. Harrison Salisbury of the New York Times and Selig Harrison of the Washington Post.
Before you went there?
I was the first academic. I was the first lawyer, the first international business person, you could say. And my wife was the first scholar of art.
Art scholars.
To go to, my wife was teaching at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. So she was very interested in Korean art, culture, Chinese influence on Korea art, etc. So we had a fabulous, interesting time. I've just been working on my memoirs. I've done 2 chapters on our relations with Korea, and I hope someday to publish them.
Wow. So, and how do you think about the Korean Peninsula peace process? Do you think the Biden administration has a new strategy for North Korea's denuclearization or something like that?
No.
No?
I think they're going to make another try. But you see, they're hemmed in by American opinion. Biden is in a very difficult political situation. He's facing next year's congressional election.
Yeah.
He's in a very weak situation. He may lose democratic control of the Congress.
2
years later, we have the next presidential election. He's in very serious problems here.
Political situation.
I don't know whether he'll run again. But he's not in a position to do anything dramatic to North Korea, because it would be extremely unpopular with the United States. That's too bad. I have advocated for years that we should have an important change in our policy toward North Korea, that we should establish diplomatic relations with the North, as occasionally we have hinted we would, that we need to have an embassy in Pyongyang. We need to have our own people on the ground so they get a better understanding of what's taking place. North Korea is desperate. They are in a worse situation than any other Asian country. Even Mongolia has more independence in its international relations. North Korea would like to be like Vietnam. So it maintains relations with both sides.
Right.
It would like to be like Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia or Thailand. It doesn't want to be only in the hands of China. And they would desperately like to have an opportunity for relations with the United States, because that would give them a chance to play the United States off against China and to get the benefits of working with the United States and the Western countries, and maybe even Japan, at the same time that they would continue to be independent of China. The problem is how to do it. And unfortunately, the North plays its cards, in some ways you could say brilliantly, but in some ways very badly. If they acted differently, they could establish relations with the United States. And that would give them greater independence vis-a-vis China. And it might even strengthen them vis-a-vis South Korea. But they don't know how to do it. And the United States seems to be unaware of the virtues of what I'm suggesting. And even if they understand it, they're politically impaired by American domestic opinion. So it's too bad, but I'm in favor, I have been for a long time, more normal relationship with Korea, just the way I favored a more normal relationship with China. It doesn't mean you love them.
I know.
You agree with them, but it does mean you're interacting in a more sophisticated, less dangerous way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Right. So, and yet, wow, we spent time listening to your some wisdom about making peace, all which is the term peace is very vague. Okay, thank you for your just giving me the time with a very interesting story. I think your life is full of academic explorations and sometimes practical. So, yeah. So I'm really touched. So with your sometimes hidden story about your more than the half a century academic studies and practices. Oh, yeah. I just try to purchase it.
On Monday, the book will be
just released. Yeah.
Oxford Press.
Yeah, just released in 2020.
I think I've told you about that.
Yeah.
This book is about what my wife and I did in China.
In China. Yeah.
It has a chapter about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you may find that interesting.
I subscribed it. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry not to just be with you in New York. If the situation is better, I would just go to New York to see you. But I think scientists say that the current pandemic is transforming into endemic or epidemics very soon with vaccine and medicine. So I'd like to just visit you in New York and talk with you with dinner with Professor Mark Schumann, okay, in the near future.
Well, I'm glad that Mark introduced us, but I hope I will have the opportunity to interview you about international law and the situation in Korea.
Thank you.